My husband invited me to a critical dinner with a potential Korean investor. I smiled sweetly, nodded at all the right moments, and performed my part as the ornamental wife flawlessly. What he never suspected was that I understood every word of Korean. And when I heard what he told that investor about me, my entire world cracked open. If a story like this speaks to you, if you've ever felt the ground vanish beneath your feet, subscribe to this channel. Stay with me. You're not alone, and there are more truths to be told. My name is Isabel. For 14 years, I believed I was in a partnership. We were a team, or so I thought. My husband, Robert, was a principal at a prestigious architecture firm in Chicago. I was an architectural historian working for a nonprofit preservation society. Our lives were a curated blend of modernist lines and historical significance, set in a restored brownstone in Lincoln Park. Robert was the vision. I was, supposedly, the soul. He designed the future, and I protected the past. It was a balance I cherished until I realized the scales had been rigged from the start. The shift was glacial. It began after the birth of our daughter, Maya, now 12. My career, always less lucrative, became flexible by necessity. His became all-consuming. My world shrank to the dimensions of school runs, historical surveys, and keeping a home that looked like it belonged in one of his firm's brochures. The loneliness was a quiet tenant, one I learned to ignore. I told myself this was the compromise of a dual-career marriage with a child. The spark dims, but the embers are warm. You make do. Robert worked late, traveled to project sites, and came home with a mind still buzzing with calculations and client demands. Our conversations were logistical. Did you pay the property tax? The Garretts are coming for dinner on the 8th. Can you take Maya to her orthodontist? I'm swamped. 3 years ago, on a night when the silence in our bedroom was a physical weight, I found an old notebook from my graduate school days. Flipping through it, I saw my hurried sketches of Korean hanok houses, notes on the Ondol heating system, the philosophical principles of Pungsu, what many call feng shui. I'd been fascinated by Korean traditional architecture, had even dreamed of doing my doctorate on it. Then I met Robert, with his sharp suits and sharper focus on steel and glass futurism. My interest was gently, persistently framed as a charming niche, a hobby. The notebook went into a box, and the box went into storage. That night, I dug it out, and then I did something for myself, a tiny, secret rebellion. I downloaded a language app. Not just any app, but one specifically for Korean. It started as a nostalgic whim, a way to reconnect with a younger, more curious self. But the language, with its elegant Hangul script and intricate levels of formality, gripped me. It became my sanctuary. Every morning, before the house awoke, I would sit at the kitchen island with a cup of tea and my headphones, tracing characters on my tablet. During my lunch break at the Preservation Society, I'd listen to podcasts. In the evenings, while Robert reviewed blueprints, I'd watch Korean dramas, then documentaries, then news segments. I found an online tutor, a patient woman named Soo Jin in Seoul, and we video chatted weekly. I told no one, especially not Robert. He had, years ago, chuckled when I mentioned maybe auditing a class on East Asian art history. Izzy, that's like studying horse-drawn carriages when you're living in the age of the Hyperloop. Cute, but not exactly relevant. The message was clear. My intellectual pursuits were decorative, not functional. So, Korean became my parallel life, my secret garden. It was hard, wonderfully hard. Within 2 years, I could read novels. Within 3, I could debate with Soo Jin about the ethical dilemmas of urban renewal in Seoul. It was the most alive I'd felt in a decade. Then, 3 weeks ago, Robert came home practically vibrating with a new energy. He tossed his briefcase onto the hall table, a rare breach of his own strict tidiness. Isabel, big development. We're pitching for the Soullight project, a massive mixed-use development in Gangnam. The lead investor is a man named Park Ji-hoon. He's flying in next Tuesday. I'm hosting him at Atelier. Atelier was the most exclusive, notoriously difficult to book restaurant in the city. A meal there was a statement. He's a traditionalist at heart, loves heritage stuff, asked if I was married, about family stability. It's a cultural thing, so you'll need to be there. He looked at me, his gaze assessing, as if checking an item off a list. Wear that black sheath dress, the one with the high neck. Looks scholarly but chic. Of course, I said, my voice calm. Will he speak English? Fluently, Robert said, taking a sip, but he prefers Korean for nuance. I've been brushing up, been taking intensive lessons with a tutor from the university. It's given me a huge edge. Park respects the effort, shows commitment. The ice in my glass clicked softly. 6 months. He'd been studying Korean for 6 months, and not mentioned it once. Not a single, "Hey, I'm learning this language you might find interesting." It was his tool, his edge. I was just part of the set dressing. That's impressive, I said. It's business, he shrugged. Just smile, be engaging, but let me handle the technical and financial talk. This deal is worth millions. I can't have any distractions. An opportunity, cold and clear, crystallized in my mind. I would sit there, a silent vessel, and I would listen. I would understand everything he thought was hidden from me. The week passed in a blur of secret preparation. I drilled business and architectural vocabulary. I reviewed honorifics and formal speech patterns. I was no longer just a student of the language. I was a spy in my own life. Tuesday night, the black sheath dress felt like a uniform. Atelier was all dark wood, soft light, and intimidating silence. Park Ji-hoon was already at the table. He was a man in his late 50s with a calm, observant demeanor and hands that moved with precise grace. Introductions were made in English. Park's English was excellent, polished at what I guessed was an American Ivy League school. He was courteous, asking me about Chicago's architecture, and I gave brief, pleasant answers, playing my part. As the first course arrived, an amuse-bouche of foie gras and cherry gelée, Robert smoothly guided the conversation into Korean. With your permission, Park Sun-sang-nim, shall we continue in Korean? It is more comfortable for the details. By all means, Park replied, switching languages effortlessly. And so it began. Robert's Korean was good, technically proficient, but it lacked the deep cultural rhythm I knew from my years of study. It was functional, a little blunt. They discussed zoning laws, square footage, investment returns, architectural integrations. I nodded along, sipping my water, a faint smile on my lips. Then Park turned to me and said in Korean, "And Mrs. Thorne, Robert tells me you are in historic preservation. That must provide a valuable counterpoint to his work." Before I could even feign a confused look, Robert answered for me. In Korean, he said, "Isabel's work is quite modest, a small non-profit. It's more of a passion project, really. She manages our home and our daughter's schedule. It keeps her occupied, and it's helpful for me to have that stability." He said the word modest like it was a synonym for insignificant. A passion project, my 15-year career, my expertise reduced to a quaint hobby. I felt the smile on my face solidify into a mask. The Park nodded politely, but his eyes lingered on me for a half-second too long. He changed the subject, asking Robert about the firm's international portfolio. The dinner progressed through 5 exquisite courses. Robert, emboldened by the language barrier he perceived, began to reveal himself. He inflated his role in landmark projects, claiming sole credit for designs I knew were collaborative efforts. He spoke derisively of sentimental preservationists who stood in the way of progress. Each word, in my native tongue by stealth, was a tiny cut. Then came the main course. As they shared a bottle of expensive Burgundy, Park mentioned the importance of legacy, of building something that lasts beyond mere profit. Robert laughed. It was a sound I knew well, confident, dismissive. He said in Korean, "Legacy is important, but you have to be practical. My wife, for instance, she's attached to old things, old ideas. She doesn't grasp the financial realities, the pressure. It's why I handle all our investments, all the major decisions. She's content with her books and her committees. It's simpler that way. I don't have to explain the complexities. She just trusts to manage everything." I set my fork down carefully, the silver barely making a sound against the porcelain. Park made a non-committal hum. "Trust is fundamental." "Exactly," said Robert, leaning in. "And to be fully transparent, because I value this partnership, I've been restructuring some of my personal holdings, diversifying, setting up a dedicated venture capital trust for future projects. It's separate from joint marital assets, cleaner for high-stakes investing. My wife isn't really involved in that side of things. It's beyond her purview." A venture capital trust, separate. My mind raced. We had joint accounts, but I'd always deferred to his expertise on investments. I signed what he put in front of me. Park's expression was inscrutable. "I see." Robert, perhaps needing to solidify his image as a decisive leader, went further. "The industry demands total focus. It helps to have a supportive home life, uncomplicated." He took a sip of wine. "There's a junior partner at my firm, Lena. She's a structural engineer, brilliant mind. We've been collaborating closely on the Soul Light concepts. She understands the language of form and force in a way that, well, let's just say it's a meeting of minds that is both professionally and personally stimulating. It's been going on for about 8 months. My wife is oblivious, of course. It's better for everyone." The air in the room vanished. The elegant chatter, the clink of glass, it all receded into a silent, roaring tunnel. There it was, not just dismissal, not just financial concealment, but betrayal, a collaboration, a meeting of minds. With Lena. I knew her, a sharp young woman with a severe bob who'd been at firm parties, who'd always praised Robert's genius a little too fervently. I looked at Park Ji-hoon. His eyes met mine for a fleeting moment. There was no shock in them, only a deep, weary comprehension. He had understood the subtext all along. He gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't camaraderie, it was acknowledgement, a witness. The rest of the dinner was a montage of blurry politeness. I operated on autopilot, a perfect mannequin. When we said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, Park took my hand. In English, he said, "It was a genuine pleasure, Isabel. I hope our paths cross again." The emphasis on genuine was deliberate. In the car, Robert was ebullient. "Nailed it," he exhaled, scrolling through his phone. "Park is a hard read, but I think he's in. Did you see how he responded when I discussed the trust structure? He gets it. You were perfect, by the way. Quiet, classy, just right." "Thank you," I whispered, staring out at the glittering city. At home, he went straight to his study to send a few follow-up emails. I walked upstairs, past Maya's closed door, and into our bedroom. I didn't cry. I felt frozen, carved out. Then a spark ignited in the hollow space. It was fury, pure and clarifying. I picked up my phone. I scrolled past the familiar names, the friends I'd let fade. I found the contact I needed, Rachel Choi. We'd been in the same doctoral program before I left. She was now a formidable forensic accountant and a certified divorce financial analyst. We'd reconnected vaguely on social media. Her last post had been about hidden assets in high-net-worth divorces. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice alert despite the late hour. "Isabel? This is a surprise." "Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need your help. I think my husband is hiding money, and he's having an affair. I need to know how to prove it all." There was a beat of silence, then the sound of a pen clicking. "Okay, start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." We talked for over an hour. She gave me a list, a clinical, devastating scavenger hunt. Bank statements, tax returns, business filings, property records. "Don't confront him," she warned. Be a ghost. Gather everything. If he's set up a trust, there will be a trail. If he's using a firm computer or email for any of this, it gets even interesting legally. The next morning, I called in sick. Robert left with a distracted peck on my cheek. The moment the door shut, I moved. His home office was a temple to his own efficiency. I started with the filing cabinet, a sleek, locked metal thing. The key was in the small Chinese ceramic box on his desk, where he'd always kept it, thinking I never noticed. I opened it. I photographed every financial document from the last 5 years, and there, nestled between statements from our known joint brokerage account, was a single page from a law firm, Bishop & Crown, LLC. It was a summary sheet for the Thorn Visionary Ventures Trust, dated 9 months prior. Initial funding, $250,000. A beneficiary designation section was blank. An ID number was listed, TVV 2023-0876. My hands trembled, but I kept taking pictures. I accessed his computer. He used the same password for everything, a variation of Maya's birthday and the word architect. It was a hubris born of never being challenged. His email was a treasure trove of quiet ruin, searches for separate property trusts in Illinois, divorce and business valuation, emails to Bishop & Crown setting up meetings, and then the emails to Lena. Not many, but enough. They weren't lurid, they were worse. They were intimate. They shared articles about architecture, yes, but also about wine, about travel to Bali. He wrote to her about building a legacy together, about how she understood the weight of his dreams. In one, sent just last week, he wrote, "Once I get the Sea Light deal secured and finalize the trust restructuring, I can start navigating the other complexities at home. It's time for a new foundation." I forwarded every crucial email to a secure account Rachel had set up. I documented transfer confirmations from our joint money market account to an entity I didn't recognize, totaling $175,000 over the past year. I found a property deed for a condo in a new downtown building, in his name only, purchased 11 months ago. The closing statement showed a wire transfer from the Thorn Visionary Ventures Trust. The evidence was a cold, hard pile. It spelled out a meticulous, long-term plan for a future where I was a complication to be managed, my financial security an afterthought. I met Rachel at her office 2 days later. She spread the printouts across a large table. "He's not just hiding assets, Isabel. He's actively converting marital property into separate property. This trust, this condo, they're classic moves. The affair is emotional leverage, but this," she tapped the trust summary, "is the financial betrayal. And because he used marital funds to seed it, we can pierce that veil. The fact that he's possibly using firm resources or time for this, we can bring that to his partners, if you choose." "I choose," I said, my voice flat. "Then we have a two-front strategy. We file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. Simultaneously, we prepare a dossier for his firm's managing partners. They won't look kindly on a principal using company time to plan his divorce and hide assets, especially if it's connected to a major client like Park." A strange calm settled over me. This was no longer about heartbreak, it was a strategic demolition. For the next month, I lived a double life. I was the attentive wife, asking about his day, listening to his stresses about the Sail Light project. I was the ghost in the machine, documenting, recording, with Rachel guiding every step. We discovered more. The condo had been furnished, the bills paid from a separate account. Lena's name was on the building's guest registry, frequent visits. My small, satisfying turn came exactly 3 weeks after the dinner. Robert was agonizing over the final Sail Light proposal. "I just can't nail the cultural integration piece," he muttered at breakfast. "Park wants a nod to traditional Korean aesthetics, but it has to be modern. It's a frustrating paradox." I looked up from my tea. Have you considered a contemporary interpretation of the Madang, the central courtyard, not as an open space, but as a multi-story light well, lined with a modern material that echoes the texture of Hanji paper? It would create a journey of light and shadow, a private sky. I used the Korean terms casually, correctly. He stared at me, his spoon halted midway to his mouth. What did you just say? The Madang, I repeated, as if it were obvious, and Hanji, Korean paper. It's resilient, beautiful, filters light softly. A modern composite could mimic that. It would show a deeper understanding than just slapping a curved roof on a glass box. I took a sip of tea. Just a thought. I read about it somewhere. The confusion on his face was priceless. It was a flicker of doubt, the first crack in his perception of me as an intellectual void. He didn't thank me, he just mumbled, that's not a terrible idea. He left for work early, and I knew he'd research those terms. He'd find that my thought was architecturally profound. The seed was planted. What else did I know that he didn't? Rachel filed the divorce papers on a Monday morning. The same hour, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to the managing partners of Robert's firm. It contained a concise summary of his financial maneuvers using the firm's time and email system, the connection to the Saillight client, and the existence of an affair with a junior employee which created a liability issue. We did not send the intimate emails, just enough to show a pattern of conduct unbecoming a principal. The fallout was swift. By noon, Robert was called into an emergency meeting. By 3 p.m., he was placed on administrative leave. His phone calls to me started then, a crescendo of panic, anger, and bewilderment. I didn't answer. Rachel did. I moved into a temporary apartment with Maya that weekend. I'd sat her down, my beautiful, perceptive girl, and told her an age-appropriate truth. Mommy and Daddy weren't going to live together anymore because Daddy had broken some important promises, and Mommy needed to make a safe home for us. She cried. I held her. We started our new, shaky routine. The confrontation came when I returned to the brownstone with a police escort and Rachel to collect more of our things. Robert looked shattered, his confidence replaced by a desperate scruffiness. Isabel, please, this is insane. You're destroying my career. Over what? A misunderstanding? We can fix this. I looked at him, this man I'd loved, who'd shared my bed and my child. What misunderstanding, Robert? That my career is a passion project? That I'm uncomplicated and can't grasp complexity? That the Thorn Visionary Ventures Trust isn't meant to exclude me? Or that your collaboration with Lena is just professional? His face, already pale, went ashen. How do you... the trust? I understand Korean, Robert. I've been fluent for years. I heard every word you said to Park Ji-hoon. Every single word. The shock that contorted his features was the most genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. It was the sound of his entire constructed reality collapsing. You can't. I can. I do. You were so busy building your future without me, you never bothered to learn who I was standing right beside you. I turned to gather a box of Maya's books. Fight the divorce if you want, but you'll lose, and your firm will likely fire you after their investigation. The choice to use your work to hide money from your wife wasn't very visionary. The legal process was a grueling marathon. Robert fought, but the evidence was overwhelming. The firm, wanting to avoid scandal with the Saillight deal still in the balance, pressured him to settle. Park Ji-hoon, interestingly, withdrew his personal investment from the project, though his company remained. Rumor reached me through Rachel that he'd cited ethical alignment concerns. In the end, I received half the value of the brownstone, half the marital assets, including the traced funds from the trust and the downtown condo, which we sold. I received significant spousal support and primary custody of Maya. Robert was terminated from his firm. He got a job at a smaller, less prestigious practice. Lena did not follow him. But the true closure, the full circle moment, came 8 months after the divorce was finalized. I had started consulting, using my preservation expertise in private development. An email arrived from an unfamiliar Korean address. Dear Isabel, I hope this message finds you well. Our brief meeting left a lasting impression. I am now leading a new initiative, the Hanok Revival Project, aimed at adapting traditional Korean architectural principles for sustainable modern living. We are establishing a North American advisory board. Your unique perspective as both a historian and someone who understands the cultural heart of these structures would be invaluable. Would you consider serving as the inaugural chair? The position is compensated, of course. Warm regards, Park Ji-hoon. He'd remembered. He'd seen the person Robert had tried to render invisible. I accepted the position. It wasn't a huge salary, but it was meaningful work that honored my passion, my hobby. It led to speaking engagements, to consulting contracts that paid more than my old nonprofit job ever had. Today, Maya is in college studying environmental design. I run the advisory board and have my own small, successful consultancy. I live in a bright loft filled with light and my own choices. Robert is a faint gray figure from another life. That dinner at Atelier was a theater of cruelty, but it was also a stage where I finally saw the truth of my own role in my husband's story. I was not the supporting character. I was the narrative he tried to edit out. Learning the language was my quiet rebellion. Hearing it was my awakening. So if you are sitting at a table where you are meant to be seen and not heard, learn to listen in a way they don't expect. Your secret knowledge is your power. Gather your proof, find your ally, and when the time comes, speak your truth in a voice they never knew you had. The life you rebuild will be your masterpiece. If you have ever been made to feel small in a world of big voices, tell me your story in the comments below. You are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories of silence broken and strength reclaimed, subscribe to the channel. Stay with me for the next one.